Right? I like that philosophy. It's true. It's like if you just do well, and then
I work in the field service. So that's my name. Good afternoon. Weekly is all.
yeah, that makes sense to me.
So why not? And then I don't like waking up early.
Yeah.
I tell them. He gave me this one.
Yeah, that's for you, but
Oh,
that
yeah.
should still
it's
work,
Yeah,
right?
that one should. Is it on?
Maybe it'll pick up the noise from, because when you go to give your introduction or me, it'll pick that up right here. I
You
imagine.
think so?
No, I
We could
tried
ask
to
the
talk
people in the
about
chat.
No, about them as well, because I think they should be in the room.
What about the people on Zoom?
You want to just type in the chat?
Can you try switch it on? And
Yeah.
Hey,
Hello.
someone on,
Can the people in the Zoom hear me? Can someone write in the chat if they can hear?
yes.
Excellent. Thank you,
Excellent.
Tiffany.
Thank you. All right, but yes.
You want to ask them again? Or do you want to just?
No, I'm talking about the people in the room. I mean,
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be fine.
they should be able to hear me.
Nah, it'll be fine.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. But before we get started, I think we have a short announcement.
Yeah, just a quick announcement. So the after seminar, like pizza party and discussion is happening today. We had a room change because of the weather. It's going to be happening in 333. If you are interested in coming but didn't sign up online, still feel free to come. But in the future, try to sign up for them because that's how we determine how much pizza to buy. But so anyway, that's what I wanted to let you guys know, and I hope you guys come to our after seminar discussion.
Thank you. Sign up for pizza? You are starving graduate students, right? I mean, it's almost given that everybody will be there. Anyway, so thank you for being here. We have a treat today, Dr. Joseph Wilkins, and actually his dad is also here. We had a long, almost 3-hour lunch.
Yeah, that's quite long.
And there were a lot of stories. Joe is going to introduce the speaker, but he even tried to include all of those stories. So we had a long time. But anyway, but here's the message from him, from his dad. He says he wants to find out how good his son really is.
Booing is allowed.
So he said, ask questions, a lot of questions. I think he actually wants to find out how good you all are. So please do ask questions. Okay? And so now, without further ado, Joe Campbell will introduce us. Okay, and say.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Campbell. I teach here at the School of Environment and Natural Resources. Part of my job is working with Coyotea is to host our school's Environmental Professionals Network. And as part of that job, I get great opportunities to go to conferences, to speak at different events, participate in different events, to meet professionals that work to connect our community of environmental professionals, help us feel inspired in our work, and help us grow in our careers. And about 6 months ago, I was at a conference in downtown Columbus that Battelle, if you know the Battelle Research Foundation, they were hosting scholars from all over, at least North America, maybe other parts of the world. And there were lots of tremendous speakers. I saw Dr. Wilkins as part of a full conference panel talking about issues related to climate change using remote sensing. It was a very engineering-centric conference. And one of the things that stuck out about Dr. Wilkins' work was how much people and the human condition was built into the story behind the data, the remote sensing, and all the great research that he's going to present now. So we struck up a conversation and a friendship, and it's an honor to have Dr. Wilkins here with us today, and Mr. Wilkins as well. So thank you all so much. I'm going to read his bio real quick. Hand it over. It's part of the job.
Yeah.
You want to hear his bio, or do you know it already?
Oh, yeah, I want to hear it.
Hear the bio?
Right.
It's impressive. Dr. Joseph Wilkins works as an assistant professor at Howard University. His research focuses on remote sensing tools and air quality model development. He earned his Bachelor's of Science in Atmospheric Science and minored in physics at the University of Louisville, and later completed his Master's of Science and PhD in meteorology with a concentration on air quality and pollution at St. Louis University. That is just 3 degrees, isn't it?
Yeah. I told you didn't have to.
There's a 4th in there somewhere, not in this bio. Dr. Wilkins is one of the leading researchers in the fire modeling community and has published manuscripts, spoken at technical conferences, and communicates his research across many governments and academic institutions globally.
Yeah.
Dr. Wilkins.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me just fine? Good, good. Do you have a clicker thingy, or am I just pressing the button? All right, that's fine. I just need it. Here we go. How do I go back? All right. So, all right, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Appreciate everybody coming out. Howdy, folks. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, so I will say howdy. The main thing I want to start about, I didn't add this in the talk, so I will add this now because I know most people care about this. I'm a fire scientist, and so what happened in Maui, as well as Canada, which many of you experienced the smoke from the Canada fires, not the Maui fires, is very important. So usually I talk about my why, and why do I care about this, why do I do what I do, which is what I hope all of you do as well, is what drives me. So my driver is what saves human life, right? I want to protect the planet, I want to protect humans. And so my father being here is kind of funny that he was a firefighter for 25 years for the city of Louisville. And so I don't want to run into the buildings like he did, which is insane to me, but I want to send those folks to the right places that are out in the forest. And so as many of you know, in Canada, there was about 30 million acres burned all within a short period of time, and it pushed a bunch of smoke down here, which caused a lot of human impacts and health. And so there's a lot of different cases where there's morbidity and mortality related to that type of smoke impacts, where this goes downwind. And then there's a lot of impacts which are close up, such as the Maui fires, where you have actual human lives being lost from the actual fire itself. I think the count was about 190 something last time they checked, and give or take about 1,000 people missing in action. So this is kind of the importance of why I do this and what's the purpose. So I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Louisville and Rubbertown. And this is one of the things that leads to environmental justice, right? So for those who know what environmental justice is or isn't, it's mainly how people are impacted differently depending on what community they're from and what community they aren't from. And so growing up in Louisville, we were relatively impoverished. Well, I don't want to say impoverished. My dad did what he did. He did what he could. But so we were growing up on the west side of Louisville. So on the west side of Louisville, there's this place called Rubbertown. So Rubbertown is known for having a bunch of chemical treatment plants, waste treatment plants, a bunch of rubber creation plants, and then power plants as well. So you can see here there's between 30 and 60 active plants at one given time. Now, the importance of this is that there are several stars here. This star right here is the home we grew up in. So I'm right here. Here's my middle school. Here's my elementary school. So every day, I'm breathing in all this stuff. So I grew up with asthma, and it kind of helped push me into my why and what I was trying to fight. So the picture on the left is essentially what I was looking at every day when I was playing football outside. And the reason why I got into meteorology more or less, because I like to see where the winds go. I would look at the power plants. I say, oh, this is cool. The wind's blowing west. I can get an advantage in football, right? But I didn't realize this is what essentially was killing most of us and most of my counterparts. And so, yeah, fast forward. Oh, yeah, let me tell this story. It's a pretty cool story, too. So the one circled here is called Roman Haas. They sent us there in elementary school to kind of visit, because it's super cool for kids to go see these waste treatment plants, right, for whatever reason. And we went there, and I was the one asshole kid who rose his hand and said, so what's coming out of the stack? And they told me water vapor. And as a kid, I was like, this seems incorrect. But I didn't have the wherewithal at the time to know whether it was actually true or not. But now I do, right? And so, yeah, so I went on to do, I was the first graduate of University of Louisville's Atmospheric Science program in 2011. And then I eventually matriculated to St. Louis University, where I got my master's PhD, as Joe mentioned. And so one of my main pillars that I like to say is science belongs to the future. And expertise is based on the past. So this is kind of how we develop things and how I move as I move through life. So today I will kind of talk briefly about the story of wildfires and the history, as well as the state of air quality and environmental justice. So I'll try to be mindful of time. I don't see a timer, but we'll see. Stop me if I'm going too long. Anyway, so I like to tell people this, is that we're facing a climate crisis here. There's a huge issue that's not impending, it's here now. Many of us are already seeing people losing their lives. For example, there was a wasn't a wildfire case, it was a heat outbreak in Seattle, for example, where it killed many people. I had colleagues that had to leave their own homes because they didn't have AC systems. They had to live in hotels for weeks. And so this is what we're seeing. You see this in Paris and all over the world. And from my point of view, there's already a bunch of water pollution issues where you have 1.4 million people dying per year. In some cases in the US, you have 6.7. And then there's air pollution issue, which I personally care about, which is about 7 to 9 million deaths per year from pollution. That's insane. If you think about that, just from breathing the air, you might die. It's insane to me. So that's what kind of what my group is working on. And then per year in the United States, we're talking about 60,000 per year, just the United States alone. And so, of course, if you look at all the deaths from premature deaths from wildfires or any type of source included, that number goes up. But anyway, so this is what we're kind of looking at to fight, is that 1 in 6 deaths are just related to pollution, which we can prevent. This is human-caused issues that humans can prevent. And this is about $4.6 trillion in loss, and that's trillion with a T. So if you don't care about human lives, you care about money, usually that's why we usually talk that way. So yeah, so brief story is that something on this planet is burning at every single moment, every single day, every single second. Something is on fire. This is typically the picture of what we see from the satellites. So when the satellites, these big, hunky, billion-dollar instruments in the air are shooting down, this is what they're looking at. And so this is what we're studying, and we're looking at how these things matriculate around and how they affect us as well as our plant counterparts. And so one thing that you have to note is that Smokey the Bear didn't lie to you 100%. You can prevent forest fires, and the reason why we say that is about 87% to 90% given year is all fires caused by humans. So some of these are planned, and some of these are some jerk out here with a fire that just lets it go from their campsite. And so those are usually the biggest issues, or you've seen people flick those cigarette butts. That's a lot of things that cause these mega fires to happen. So for example, California, several million acres have been burned just from cigarette butts alone. And some of those million acres have been burned from a down power line, for example. So this is our power energy friends who need to work on this. And we just found out recently that about 3 companies so far have gone bankrupt from being sued for this thing to happen. And so, yeah, so this is also becoming an issue from their side of it where they don't want to go bankrupt because they have a bad power line. And we don't want them to have the bad power line. So it's symbiotic. And so when it comes to pollution, fires are increasing in mass, they're increasing in nature. So we're seeing about 40% of the particulate matter that's of a certain size that gets into your lungs and eats at them, that's coming from fires now. And so on a given year, it can be up to 60%, 70%, sometimes 10 to 20. And the main thing to talk about here is that there's inequities in how we breathe that air. So we're seeing that for the African-American community, sometimes it's up to 70% more that we're breathing it. In the Latinx community, it's between 40 and 50%. So you see these injustices in that realm, and we're investigating that as we move forward. So for those who don't know what it actually looks like, here's a schematic of what it looks like when you wanted it to happen on the left, it's prescribed burn, and when you didn't want it to happen, which is a wildfire on the right. So typically prescribed burns are good for stopping the big thing on the right from happening. So you burn like a small patch, or you burn like the bottom of it. So if you've ever seen a fire, or if you haven't seen a fire, it moves pretty quickly generally. And so it just burns all the surface floor, and it scars the edges of the tree. So if we look at tree rings, we can see what years mega fires came through. Now, the fires that are really bad, which is one on the right, is when it burns the crown, so it burns the top. So think about you have a match and it burns the whole match. Usually you just want it to burn that top part, well, bottom part in this case, but yeah. So that's the difference of what we're talking about, and it changes who breathes the pollution, it changes where the pollution goes. So higher pollution goes up higher in the atmosphere, it's chances to affect people downwind, such as what happened in Canada, where 90% of the United States was receiving smoke at one given time. And if we'd have had more of these prescribed burns where a couple of the local folks would have felt the fire effects, we would have prevented that whole thing from happening. So this is what we're trying to investigate on when we should do that more. So how do we do this? So I get to have a lot of fun, essentially. I get to launch weather balloons at any given point in the country or in other parts of the different world. And I get to fly drones, little cool little flights, planes, different sizes. You attach instruments to those, and I also get the, hold on, let me move the screen out the way. Hold on. I think it's a way to hide it, right? Hide the, yeah. All right, cool. So yeah, so this is a 40 days, 40 nights NOAA trip on a voyage. So we get on a ship and we go off the west coast of Africa. We launch balloons and have instruments on there. And then each summer, I get to take about 50 undergrad students on a flight with NASA to where we're flying around different cities and we're looking at the pollution effects as it comes to your city from the base level where you breathe all the way up to the top of the atmosphere. So that's what we typically do. We take a lot of measurements, as well as we have a facility at Howard's campus, or our sister campus out in Maryland, Beltsville, where we take a bunch of different in situ measurements. So we're talking about formaldehyde, ozone, particulate matter, all these things we're capturing at the ground level, and we're taking it all the way up to the top of the atmosphere. So that's kind of what I do, and I work with a lot of partners on those initiatives. So this is actually my pride and joy. I'm actually a computer modeler who pretends to be an instrument scientist. And so, so what I get to do when I'm not out in the field playing around, I actually get to do my real job, which is designing computer systems. And so what I do here is I write fancy code that essentially takes every fire that happens and I push trajectories from it. So trajectories are just particles and they're markers. So they tell you where the smoke is going to go. And then I work with my partners from NASA who are measuring things as they fly over, and they're taking transects to figure out what is actually happening in the atmosphere, and we kind of validate those and evaluate those as they go forward. So this simulation is about 40,000 particles that were launched from these particular fires that were emitted, and we try to figure out how we can figure out source-receptor type relationships for where the fire is going, where it came from, and you can try to figure out the toxicity of it and how toxic it will be as it ages, as it goes through the atmosphere. And so what we do then is we take that and we shove that information back into fancy computer models. So the weather research and forecasting model, we help develop that, as well as the CMAQ model, so the Community Multiscale Air Quality Model, which is a regulatory model housed by the Environmental Protection Agency where I was working at previously. And we do all these things to pretty much improve our capability of predicting these type of systems and who's going to be impacted. So a lot of people were saying, how are we supposed to know this fire was going to happen? We knew it was going to happen before it happened, and we also knew who was going to be impacted. And we're trying to get the word out to folks. So like, if you want to Google fire and smoke map, that's what my group helps develop with the Forest Service. And you could look at it right now to see exactly how much pollution you're breathing from fire smoke this day. The only problem is you'd have to know it exists. And so this is what we're trying to work for. That's why I'm going on this Swan Song Talks. Right? So yeah, anywho, and so the decadal story here, which is why you're all here, right, is that what have we found looking at fires? So this is the first 5-year wave from 2008 to 2012. So this is right when the big ramp up has been happening with the temperature change, as well as what years we were interested in modeling where fires started getting really bad. So from this image here, you can kind of tell where fires typically occur on the landscape, which is primary. So we know where we can place our instruments, we know where we can place our model efforts at. And you can see, of course, you know West Coast is always on fire, and most people know that. But what's not intuitive is in the middle of the country, in the Flint Hills region, where most of our bison, or if you eat meat, you know where that stuff's coming from, right? It's the good old cowboy days and all that stuff. So about 2 million acres burned per year in a 2-month time span, typically. So around April, either March or sometime into May. And so you have 2 million acres that are burned by humans. And this pushed a bunch of emissions into the air, as well as Louisiana, who likes sugar, right? Sugar cane, always burning down there. That's really the only way you can get rid of that stuff. And then you have, of course, the Southeast corridor where there are a bunch of fires there. So what we found is, again, as you add fires to the landscape, you're increasing the particulate matter, which is usually that harmful stuff that gets into your lungs, by a factor of 4, purely just from one source. And then ozone, which is that unhealthy stuff in the air that tends to, again, kill our ability to breathe and causes cancer and all the things like that, we're increasing by 14%. And so these are things we're looking at, and we're also looking at how these things move around, because the EPA cares about what? Suing people and finding people. I know, it's not always there, but they want to stop these things. And the best way to stop these things is to have standards. So we have the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. So it sets a threshold for when it's the oh crap point, is what I like to call it. Like, what is the level I'm going to breathe in this stuff and it's going to really kill me? And the problem is plants and things we eat are before those levels. So for example, with ozone, plants die at about 40 parts per billion. They start to eat the stoma, which is what they breathe through. And our lungs start to get impacted about 60 to 75, depending on who you talk to. And so this is what we're looking at across the globe. Oh yeah, let me mention this before we slide on. At any point in time, about 10% of the population across the entire United States is always living in unhealthy air quality. And on the West Coast, that goes up to about 30%. And so if you think about that 300 million and you do some math, you can slice it and come up with the numbers. So anyways, one of the main things I want people to know is that with all those regulatory uses, we're doing our job. Things are getting better, right? However, there's a pervasive issue that's coming on the way that we can't really solve, which is the background air is getting bad. So we're slowing down the pollution from the power plants. We did these cash for clunkers programs, got better cars on the road. Everybody wants electric vehicle, blah, blah, blah. However, the background pollution is getting higher and higher to where it's becoming more unsustainable for us to live. And this eventually will hit its ugly head at some point when those points meet. So you see that figure on the left, eventually those points will meet. What we call the good air, the bad air, will eventually be the same air. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about. But on the right, this is how it affects plants. So I was in the Midwest, so a lot of corn, soybean crops. We used to talk to our farmers about how the air quality is going to impact their yield that year. So this is how they can do their budgets. So we can say, based off the air quality forecast, you know that you're going to get 20% less yield that year because the plants can't breathe, or you're going to get 40%, or you might not get anything, right, in some different parts. So this is something good to know. Yeah, and I'll breeze through this part because it's not the fun part. But so we do, we call it non-controllable ozone sources or non-controllable particulate matter sources. So you can track air as it moves around the planet that didn't come from your exact site. So this is used for exceptional demonstration. So if you say, for example, you're in Indiana and Louisville's polluting the crap out of your Indiana air, you can say it's their fault, it's not ours, don't sue us, right? And so we can do that by fancy meteorology. You can make these maps of smoke. You can make these maps of like the upper stratosphere, the upper air. You can see how things are moving around and where everything is coming from. So you can exactly tell what caused 5% of this to come into your area, 10% of that. So it's really cool stuff that you can do with these modeling simulations. And then the next piece is you don't have to rely on models because some people don't believe them. So you can actually take measurements of the atmosphere. So we launch a bunch of weather balloons as well as we have measurements all on the ground, and you can see the basis of the column. So this is from the surface up to the top of the atmosphere. It's about 6 miles high for those who don't speak kilometers, which is 15 here. And so we saw that ozone is being contributed by fires about 10 to 15%. And then we see that when it comes to the stratosphere, you're seeing about the same impacts, depending on what's going on from the weather standpoint. So for those who don't know, air moves around at all times. We can't really control it. So you have air getting sucked down from the stratosphere that's bringing that ozone-rich air from the top that usually protects us, like almost like sunscreen. So some of that sunscreen is coming down into areas it shouldn't be. So think about that. Sunscreen getting into areas in your body that you don't want. That's pretty much what ozone is when it comes to the stratosphere. And then so we have these sources all mixing together to cause a cluster you know what. So anyways, this is for those bored enough who want to know about modeling, you can look at this slide later. But yeah, this is all the fancy modeling we do to set up a simulation to where essentially we're trying to figure out how can we improve our systems to model these things better. So one of the quick things I'll mention is that there was an issue with how the fires are being characterized in the model. So it used to be a fires go to work is what I called it. Fires will wake up at 6 a.m., they work for 11 hours, and they go to sleep at 6 p.m. We all know in reality this is not how fires burn. And so this was the first quick and dirty change that I made into the modeling system, where it's like, let's get the intensity period and let's actually put the thing where it is. And so now we know what we're actually burning. We know how long it's burning. We know how intense it is. We can actually get the emissions correct. And when you get the emissions correct, you can tell what the predictions are going to be. And now you're improving your system slowly. So that's kind of what this slide is talking about. So, yeah. So again, more fancy modeling. Part of what we're doing to evaluate and assess these models is we're looking at ground-based instruments that we have. So part of it is the air quality system that the EPA has set up around the United States. So there's a bunch of ground-based monitors, as well as we pay different companies to place models. So you have low-cost sensors, what we call them, so the 1,000 to 100s range, and you can place these everywhere. So we did this in California, and we just ran a model simulation during a fire, and you can kind of see how the diurnal variability, which is the fires go to work thing, becomes really critical. So we learned that in some cases, the fire only needs to be spaced out for 3 hours versus 11 hours. So essentially what that is, and you can coordinate that with satellite overpasses, as you see on the right. And it gets really cool agreement. So we noticed that this is the problem, that it works, and that it helps you also get the correct buoyancy. For those who don't realize, if your fire doesn't burn hot enough, or if you space out the heat too much, then the height won't go up to where it needs to go. And if the height doesn't go up, for those who know meteorology, you won't get to the right layer, so you won't get the right wind transport. So all this stuff impacts who you can warn and who you can tell is breathing that air and when they're going to breathe it, right? So if I can tell you the day and the time and the hour that you're going to get bad air, you can protect yourself. So this is kind of what we're trying to do for folks. And we want to just give them a chance, right? So we call it mitigation, essentially. If I can tell you on Tuesday, July, whatever, you're going to breathe this much smoke, it's going to be bad, you can prepare yourself. So I'd like to tell people it's the same thing as if it's going to rain, like today, for example. We got rained on getting here. If we would have looked at the weather forecast, it likely would have said, you should probably bring an umbrella today, right? For those who didn't check the weather forecast, you got rained on like we did, right? And so it's the same thing with air quality. If you don't check the forecast, you're going to get smoke all in your system. And then you're going to be talking to people like me, giving me job security, right? So again, this is another study we did where it shows that if you just change the elevation that the smoke goes to, you can capture about difference between 60 and 40% of the smoke, and it goes to a different area. So this is a case that kind of got me into fires, of the 2013 rim fire. So I was a grad student, same as y'all, getting forced to do experiments with my advisor, and they made me babysit a bunch of undergrads launching weather balloons, right? So I'm thinking I'm just innocently launching these weather balloons, and I kept getting these high signals. I was like, what the hell, like, what is this? It keeps screwing up my numbers. And then I actually looked into some modeling to see what air was coming from. It kept coming from California. It's like whatever's happening in California is screwing up my model, screwing up my system. And it turns out with a quick Google, at the time, this is the third largest fire in California history, the Rim Fire. And so I was able to capture fire from California with measurements I was taking in the middle of St. Louis at the planetarium there. And that's when I kind of was like, oh, this fire thing is serious. Like, we really have air that's terrible to breathe because of California. Like, it's like the interconnectedness of the world is really what we're focusing on. And so I've since done quite a bit of experiments to measure this kind of same interactions as we go forward. And I think my slides are trying to rush me, so this is good. Yeah, so essentially what I've cut my teeth doing and kind of got, well, famous of sorts for is the plume rise. So doing different delegations of how to model these things, because currently the way we treat fires was, again, the fires go to work issue, and we treated them like power plants. So before I wrote my code to do it, it was just, you've seen a smokestack, how just sitting there stationary, and it just has smoke just coming out as it goes, like I showed you in the earlier image. Imagine putting that in your model as a fire. It's pretty stupid when you think about it, right? But that's all we had back in the 60s and 70s when they were originally doing this. And they also only cared about smokestacks then, they didn't care about fires. So you gotta give the old folks a grain of salt with that. And so yeah, so we've since done some improvements and done some tests. And now we have it to where we can tell you whether it gets trapped in the boundary layer, which is what we breathe, or if it gets out, which means somebody else is gonna breathe that air. So now I can tell you a one-to-one relationship and exactly explain to you when that's gonna happen, where it's gonna happen. And for those who don't model it into their system, they can go back as like a lookup table if you talk to the engineers, and they can just say, oh, I missed this part of the transport, let me add it in. So that's kind of the power of what we can do now. And then lastly, this is the conclusion for this section part. Talk isn't over, sorry. But you can, it's kind of a conclusion of what I was telling you about. One of the biggest pieces that we're still struggling with is including smaller fires. So when a fire is less than 200 hectares or 100 acres or what have you, it was seen as the fire doesn't have the correct buoyancy or it doesn't have enough heat to reach a certain level. So we're just gonna put it in the bottom layer. The bottom layer of the model is 20 meters, folks. So if you've seen anything burn that's like a backyard pile, you know it's gonna go higher than 20 meters. But that's the way we treat it. And they say, oh, it's well mixed. It'll just mix into the bottom layer and we'll get the capture. No, that's not true. And so some of these things can get up just as high outside of the boundary layer. I'm talking about 2,000 to 3,000 meters in the atmosphere, and they can go downwind transport too. But a lot of times when people are burning, we realize that they only cared if, for in Kansas, for example, it was, is it gonna cover the highway? Is it gonna hit the city? If not, screw whoever breathes that air. And now we're realizing this is not the answer, right? Because there's someone downwind who's getting inundated with smoke all the time just because you're missing the highway, right? And so now we can do this, again, interconnectedness and try to figure out what's going on. So now I'm gonna briefly move into the state of air quality. And y'all can slow me down if I'm talking too fast. Yeah. So for those who don't know, who aren't traditionally meteorologists or modelers, you can get a sense of all the stuff we're dealing with. This is why we can't get the prediction right. Because you have all these different sources. So you have the sun itself is sending huge amounts of energy to the system. And if you don't get that part right, you're gonna screw your model up. There's a bunch of clouds in the atmosphere. If you can't figure out where the clouds at, you're gonna screw your model up. There's a bunch of interactions between the temperature of the water, the oceans, the lakes, the streams. If you get that wrong, you're gonna screw your predictions up. If you don't figure out how many cars are on the road, where the cars are at, you're gonna screw your predictions up. So this is what we're facing in terms of just figuring out how to get the model and the dynamics correct and the physics in order to drive the air quality and the meteorology. So it's kind of a tidbit there. So what is the state of the air quality? All right, it's good-ish, right? We've gotten a lot better than before, but we got a lot of work to do. CO2 is still killing us all, rising temperatures, right? But it's slowing down in a bit, but it's still kind of increasing, depending on who you talk to. And the EPA, as it currently states, is looking at criteria pollutants that are mostly somewhat well. So I'll go into them a bit as one by one. For carbon monoxide, which essentially will kill you if you breathe it too much, we've decreased about 65% in the last 20 years. So woo, sex case, right? And then we have lead. When was the last time y'all heard about a lead outbreak? We pretty much eradicated lead from our system. Unless you bust into one of these old buildings, then you'll find some lead really quickly. And then sulfur dioxide coming out of these power plants. Since about 2000 to 2007, when we put scrubbers in there, clean them out as it comes out, we've essentially gone down about 86%. So again, these are success cases. Regulations do work. The EPA does have a job for a reason, and things are working. However, there are some areas where things aren't good, right? In terms of ozone, we've decreased very, very slow rate, so 10 parts per billion. And again, we're sitting at a background in the summer about 55 parts per billion. So if you remember what I said earlier, plants are dying to about 40 parts per billion. So if you're sitting your plants in unhealthy air at all times, how much growth do you think we're going to get? How healthy do you think that apple is going to be? How healthy do you think that tree is going to be? So this is the issue we're facing, and we need to get that number down. However, that background number is getting to the point where it's almost unhealthy at all times. Like right now, I think the background is probably about 35 parts per billion. So it's sitting 5 parts per billion right below the oh crap point for plants. And that's the background typically in most places when it's considered clean. So this is what we're fighting against. In the particular matter, got a lot of work. You still see cities across the world that look like that. Y'all saw that when the fires hit New York, people out there doing yoga and stuff out the block with that. This stuff you don't want to breathe. The problem I try to tell most people is that you can't see bad air quality most of the time. This is what is really hard to sell to people. So if you go outside on a clear sunny day, usually people think, oh, I can throw the ball with my friends, go play cornhole. No, it might be polluted. So check your apps and check what we do. And then nitrogen dioxide coming out of cars has gotten a lot better, 33%, but we still got a lot of work to do. And then I like to point out this part. Everybody thinks that renewable energy is going to save us. We are nowhere near there yet, folks. We're only at 5% of renewable energy in the United States. Yeah, there's places like Denmark where they're 46%, so it's possible. However, if you've seen your infrastructure here, you know that we're not using renewables. And then mostly the technology we have is pretty far out in terms of wind and solar energy. So there's a lot of work to be done before we can just assume that that's going to save us all. So yeah, moving forward, more torture stories of grad students. We had a grad student do about 700 papers, a couple grad students really. And then they looked through all the health studies as related to wildfires and pollution, and they pretty much came together with some of these numbers. We put it into a nice database, and then we looked at morbidity and mortality as it relates to pollution, smoke, and that's kind of how we got the numbers I talked about earlier, and we also have some more numbers I'm going to talk about too. Yeah, so what we did, we essentially took a fancy modeling, and we looked at wildfires, and we looked at without wildfires. We looked at both of those sources as these things. So everything else other than wildfire, everything only wildfire, and we mixed it with health data. And so we looked at this across the CONUS, but I'll talk about California mostly today. And we can kind of see like what exactly is impacting deaths and how much is it impacting those deaths. And so one cool study, well, depends on what you call cool, is ER visits, right? I can tell you when you visited a hospital, why you visited the hospital based off your ailment. So if you came in there with a bronchitis outbreak a couple days after fire or during the fire event, I can tabulate it. You can kind of link those two together. So we can see how many people made it to the hospital and passed, which means they're no longer with us, or how many people made it to the hospital, just did an inhaler or an albuterol, and then you got sent home. So we're also looking at how often are you missing work because of these type of outbreaks? How often are your kids missing school? So if you have a kid who's within that 0 to 5, this is really critical because they're in the sensitive group. So this is why this is important, right? So back in my day, we used to have, this sounds old when I say that, right? So back in my day, we used to have a nurse in our elementary school. And so you go there, I was a kid who had the inhaler, I had to sit there and have the breathing treatment, then I go back to class. Nowadays, who has a nurse at their school? So most of that kid is staying home, and then the parents have to stay home. So now you're missing work, your kid's missing school, all because of something that we could prevent, right? So this is why we look at this stuff. And so the way we're trying to look at it now is we're shoving it into a Google Earth Engine tool. So this is a fancy tool online to where anybody can Google at any time their issues, their area, their region, down to their area code, zip code, and they can figure out what are they susceptible to? Like, what are you being impacted by? Is it a power plant? Is it a fire? Is it you're next to a highway? Is that your issue? And so we can put all this into a modeling tool, and then we can tabulate these things. So what we did for fires is we kind of just said, what is the over a 10-year period of time? What are the average impacts? And if you guessed it, the average impacts is people will die, money will be lost. So we're looking between 2,000 deaths to 12,000 per year from one source, and that's just fires. And then we're also looking between 10 billion and 100 billion. Again, billion with a B. That's a lot of money. I don't know if you've ever seen a billion, I haven't. I wish I did, right? But that's a lot of money from one thing that we're losing. And so we can tabulate all this, put it into a system. So this leads us to the last part. How does this impact environmental justice? Because again, I said, it's not impacting us all equally. And even if you're rich in some cases, if you live in certain areas, you're still gonna breathe the same air. And this is what I originally tried to do with my why as a kid. I want to show the rich folks they're breathing the same air as us poor folks. And that's essentially what I'm still doing these days. I'm still not rich, right? We'll get there. But so again, one of the things I like to tell people is that the biggest thing that grinds my gears or pisses me off, I'll just say it straightforward, is politicalness of it all. Air quality shouldn't be a political issue. Climate change is not a political issue. However, it has been made into one, so we have to think about it that way. So one of the biggest examples I'll give you is, I won't use the names, but you can guess, President number 44. got us into the climate action plan, Paris agreements, was really gung-ho, trying to fight through and setting up all these things to protect the planet. Fine. President 45 comes in. We removed all those things and got out. We said, screw the Paris Agreement, screw the other countries, 127 countries, I think it was. We just left them high and dry. Now, the EPA, if you don't know, is the world leader in air quality. So you took the world leader in the sciences out of the team. How is the team going to operate? That's like removing a coach from Ohio State and then go play Maryland tomorrow. You know, it's kind of stupid, right? So again, this is what happened. And so it took us essentially 4 years of removing all the stuff we did the first 8 years. And so you had it to the point when I was working there, they literally said, we can't use the word climate change. We have to literally scrub it from all our websites. They literally decommissioned people's research that were researching it. They literally removed websites. It literally was on whitehouse.gov, they blacked it out. It was insane. And some of the websites they just shut down. And so they did all this because they could, just because it was political. And then 46 comes in, and then we redo all the stuff 44 did. Stupid, right? And so as you know, if you've ever taken a measurement of anything, stopping it for 4 years is not the best idea. And then saying, oh, I'm just gonna pick it back up. That's like if you were dating somebody, you broke up with them for 4 years and say, yeah, just pick it up where we left off. That looks like you're crazy, right? So why would we do this? But that's essentially what we did. And that's why we gotta get out of this thing. But anywho, to the last part of the talk. Kind of some of the cool stuff we can do is we've been creating a community health vulnerability index. I've had some students working on this for quite some time. And we've since revamped what the EPA used to do. And you can see the two images on the bottom left. I don't know how well these screens are showing up from your view. We've essentially enhanced it to include how adaptable you are, which means, can you fight the bad thing happening to you? Which means, do you have the money to change your filter in your house? Do you have the knowledge to do so? A lot of people, when was the last time you changed your filter in your homes? A lot of us like, wait, I gotta change that thing, right? And so this is a huge issue. How many of you have air quality filtration systems in your house? Most people don't, right? Most people might have a humidifier that looks cool and colors up or something like that. That's what most people have. Right? How many of you actually want to wear a mask? Most people don't. We've learned that from COVID, right? Even when you tell them, oh, you might not die if you wear a mask, most people don't care. And so if I tell you, you gotta wear a mask to prevent from this invisible monster, it's really difficult to convince people. I was arguing with people on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, everything, trying to tell them to wear a mask when they could see the smoke. So I can imagine trying to argue with people when they couldn't see it. So this is what we're trying to develop a tool to show folks. And again, since my group mostly was focusing on California for this funded money, so we can make a map of this stuff. So I can show you exactly what point in time, how much you're breathing again, and this is kind of what those maps look like. So at any point you can just say, oh, I live in Reno Valley, whatever California neighborhood, you live in LA. So I live in LA, I'm on this side of LA, this is what my air quality is. So now you can empower yourself to fight your alderman, your district attorney, whoever you want to go to and say, our area sucks. We're breathing some bad stuff here. Do something about it. Right? And so now you can empower the people. So now you have the same tools as scientists do, and you can go out and you can tell people. And we do this with tribal communities as well. So we're working with a lot of different tribal groups because they're not on federal protected lands as well. So they're technically a whole nother country who lives in our country is how they're treated. And so now they can empower themselves to say, United States, you're screwing up our air and our land, our water. We can fight back with them too. So this is kind of what we're doing. And again, it's in the Earth Engine tool, and we're connecting to a wider audience. So as I mentioned earlier, the best way to prevent some of these wildfires and these large fires is to burn. And it's crazy to a lot of people, but that's what the natives did. That's what the Native Americans did. Well, they burned. A lot of fires, they managed the land. We do that same thing, but we do it wrong. We've been screwing it up for the last 200 plus years, however long whoever you consider in control of this country has been in control. And now we're trying to fix that. So what we do now with the modeling systems we have and the systems we have is we essentially just make up scenarios. So we'll say, if we burn this many acres for this year, how much wildfire will we prevent? How much damage will we prevent? How much will we save? If we do nothing, what will happen? And so that's essentially what this study was that I had a student do. And she eventually found out that you do need to do something is essentially the short answer. You can't just sit there and not burn anything if you want some results. But there's an issue with that. Some fires are good, some fires are bad. Who do you care about, right? So if I'm a forest manager, I care about managing my forest for managing the forest purposes. I care about the plants, the animals, the trees, the makeup of it, and the biodiversity. If I'm an air quality scientist such as myself, I care about the smoke. I care about how much smoke are you producing from there. So now we're gonna butt heads and argue because our interests are different. And so now you have two people who essentially should be on the same team arguing with people who aren't. So the Forest Service essentially butts heads with the EPA because they're like, we're managing the land. And And they're like, no, screw you, you're putting too much air in our system, you're killing people. And so it's like, how do you balance that? And that's essentially what this study was doing, is showing that it's very difficult. There is no balance at this point. So we're working to get that balance as we go forward. Yeah, so lastly, I want to hit upon this point is that we can go down to the exact county that you live in and tell you how long you're going to get pretty much, because air quality takes off years of your life. We can tell you how much years of your life is going to take off of based off how long you breathe, how many times you go outside, et cetera, et cetera. And I want to point y'all to the top right corner. Again, I want to reiterate, we're talking about 3,000 deaths per year, whether it's hot, dry, windy. So this is El Nino, La Nina for the meteorology group, people in the group. And then we're talking about on average 8,000 deaths per year. Again, this is stuff that we can prepare people for since we know where they are. So if I know where you are and I know you don't have the money to buy these things, I can fund you to do so. And that's what makes this powerful. So now you don't even have to know that you have a problem. I know that you have a problem, I can go fix it, right? We can hire the people to go into these systems. So we know how vulnerable you are. And we also know how much money you have in that area because there's census tracts. So I know how much money you make. And I know somebody making $25,000 a year is not gonna go buy a HEPA filter that's rated to protect themselves. They're not gonna go buy these masks. You're gonna spend it on food, you're gonna spend it on your children, you're gonna spend it on things that matter to you. So if it matters to me to protect you, I need to be able to tell you that. Why? So again, we do this everywhere across the United States, and it's different everywhere. There's different problems. As you know, the United States is pretty big. So we have different ecosystems, we have different problems. And this is one thing I want to point out to. I mentioned the fire and smoke map we do with the Forest Service. This is kind of a snapshot of what it looks like. So everything that's burning at any given time, we have a point pixel for it. And then we also have the air quality monitoring stations that are from the EPA on here. So you can see where exactly to be bad at, so you can protect yourself. So you can Google this at any point in time. You can put it on your laptop, type it in, and you can look at, like, you can literally do it right now if you want to. You zoom in on your area and you can say, oh, we're good, or we're not good, right? So this is what we're trying to push out to people. And there's also a smoke sense map that we developed, the app with the EPA. So, yep. And again, lastly, I'll end with this little quick case for environmental justice and simplify it. So in DC, a lot of people think that DC is diverse. A lot of people think that the DC is like a melting pot, and it's not. So I won't go through the numbers on there. Y'all can read, I'm sure, but there's a lot of factors when it comes to it. So the average Black family in DC averages about household of 3,500,000. When you have the average white family, it's 284,000. This is a quick disparity to tell how you can quickly mitigate yourself if financial means is the thing. Like when I lived in North Carolina, for example, when hurricanes would come, which is a major thing, I would just leave. I would just fly somewhere, stay in a hotel for a couple days, go visit family and friends, and I would just hang out. How many people do you know who are struggling financially can do that, right? It's not really a realistic solution for everybody. So it's the same thing with air quality, the same thing, like you can't really do anything about your issue. And so this is why I put this little quote in there, is that the common wisdom says that the average person doesn't care about climate change because they think the effects will unfold in a far future, far away. This is not Star Wars. It's not far, far away. This is now. So we have to tell people that because of your current conditions, you won't be able to fight this back. So we have to help that and make it even for everybody. And so the reason why I wanted to mention this too is that look at these maps, folks. Y'all see this color change? Who thought DC was that diverse? I mean, that undiverse, I'm sorry, the opposite. It's crazy to me when I first saw it. I lived there. I'm like, I didn't know it was that segregated. It's crazy, like a straight line, pretty much. Almost like somebody did it on purpose, right? And guess where the pollution lives? Right where the color folk live, right? For lack of a better term. So yeah, we can see this clearly. And it shocks you, right? When you first see it, like, who would have thought DC was like this? Our nation's capital. And guess what? Every other city's like this to some degree. And you know who can't say anything, who can't fight back? The folks living and breathing the air, most of the time, don't even know it. They don't realize that, oh, because I live in this street, this neighborhood, that neighborhood, I'm getting a lot worse from the tree diversity, from the air I'm breathing, from the heat I'm receiving. Some places it's 10 degrees different on a hot summer day. And in one city, because you're 5 minutes up the road, because that neighborhood was underserved. And so this is what we're fighting against. And this is just asthma rates we're talking about here. And so for folks like me who have asthma, if you live on a certain side of the city, you might have to miss more days of work, more days of school, just because of where you live. And you might not have chose where you live. You might just live in your parents' house. You might live with a friend. You might have to socially nominally go somewhere because you can't afford $3,000 rent in DC, right? So that's what we're looking at. Anywho, thanks for coming out. So yeah, we got a lot of steps to do, a lot of work. I got a couple more slides, but yeah, this is pretty much it. That's an update of what we're doing. We're looking to improve these tools. We're looking to fight back and looking to empower the folks and people. And then I want to thank my group. We call ourselves the Howard University Buddies Atmospheres Group. Yes, I am Buddy. That is my nickname my father gave me when I was a kid. Long story short, I'll give it to you another time. But yeah, I'd like to thank them. And then I like this picture, so I always put it in there. It's a really cool picture. We're about to get on the DC-8 for NASA with a group of students. And then I'd like to thank all my funders. And then, yeah, I'd like to thank that guy. So I call him my unicorn. He's super special. He's a good father. And I got him this balloon for a birthday gift. So imagine this dude's a hardcore Marine, firefighter, the most bravos guy you can meet. And I give him a unicorn balloon. And he smiled, so it was good. And then you see also, we like football. So I put a picture of us on the Jumbotron, a University of Louisville football game. Super cool, awesome time. And again, thank you to my father. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him, obviously, for most reasons, but other non-obvious reasons too. And yeah, thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'll take questions. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Could y'all not hear me online? Sorry if that was the thing. Hopefully y'all could hear me at some point. Oh, they were talking to them. Okay, I saw it at 4:15. I was like, oh, I thought the mic was pretty close. Yeah, but yeah.
This mic wasn't working.
Okay. Yeah, there's no question online. Anybody have a question in the room?
Please repeat the question.
You have a question?
For the people online.
All right. What's your question?
So, in the top right hand corner, you got showing multiple lives.
No, it's just from fires.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
mine.
Go ahead.
What part of that 8,000 US is that like top per country? Are we is that a high percentage of that? What is the breakdown like? What is the top country responsible for that 8,000?
So the question, I assume, is out of the 3,000 deaths per year and the 8,000 deaths per year in terms of pollution in the United States, are we in the top countries causing it, or are we in the top countries receiving the deaths?
No. Are we one of the top country causes? So we account for 8,000.
No. So the answer short is no. So if you look at the globe and you think of forest, we have a pretty large amount, but we don't have the largest. So why do you have cereal, man? So yeah, usually the Amazon is a very large producer. So usually our South American counterparts are usually receiving more deaths. So sometimes they get 100,000, 200,000 a year. That's why that number's so high. So it's not here that all the deaths are coming. And they have less mitigation factors. In Africa, Congo, big, burns, yeah. So it's a big source. And then you also have Siberia forest, the Boreal forest. And then you have Canada, which is what we got a lot of pollution from. And then northern Mexico is a huge source as well. So there's a lot of sources around the globe that actually filter this number, and it all depends on the climate. And so whether it's hot, dry, windy in different areas is going to cause these flare-ups. So yeah, good question. You talking about the magnitude of it?
Yeah, that's like a lot of individuals in small places.
Yeah, it is, and that's the problem. And so you have the air that gets up outside of the boundary that affects everybody in the global system. Like we have fires that still have smoke in the stratosphere to this day that's just traveling around. We can watch it with the satellites. But the stuff that gets trapped in our air we breathe is usually what we focus on, and that number can vary. Like 300,000 is not that much in the scheme of what it usually can do. That's a pretty modest average year. Yeah, that's what we see. Yeah. I agree. We shouldn't let 100,000 people die per year, which is why I have a job, right? So, but the thing is, you can't fund this. That's the problem. Like I can't go to a place that, like for example, we try to work in South America. There's Bolivia, Colombia. These are all different countries, right? It's not like the United States where it's just states that don't like each other. It's actual countries. And then you have a breakdown of government. And so you'll have where, like, for example, he's working with the state, well, not the State Department, but a State Department equivalent in Bolivia. We had a good relationship with the embassy, all of that stuff. And then 2 years later, all those people got pushed out. So everything we built, all the instruments we had, they were like, you gotta go. We don't like y'all. We don't support this. Same as here when 44 went to 40. Yeah, it's the same thing. And so that happens a lot quicker time frames. And then the unrest and the change. And so again, most people care about money. They don't care about loss of life. So yeah, good question. I think you were next. Okay, yeah. Go ahead. I'll get his question, then I'll talk to Samantha.
Policy change or program that would be your first step in?
So you mentioned health filters as a solution, and can we get a program? There are programs, that's the problem. Mostly it's the knowledge of people that know that they can go get it. Like for example, they did a big program where they were putting solar panels on people's houses for free almost for years. Nobody knows about it, nobody signs up for it. And most of the time, the places you need to put the HEPA filters, those people don't have enough time to watch the news and sit around and learn about these programs. And they're definitely not at these meetings like this. Those people are not, they don't have the time to focus on these things. They don't have the knowledge. So that's why we're trying to go on these road shows, we're trying to get out in the communities. And a lot of times, honestly, they don't trust scientists. That's the biggest thing. And if I told you that I'm a scientist, I'm gonna come to your house with this hunky machine, just trust me, let it sit here and buzz. People are like, what? No, even if I give them to them for free. So unless you mandate it somehow, and then if you mandate stuff, you know how people get here in this country. Yeah, think about the vaccine, right? If I tell you. Anyways, but yeah, good question. Let's do Samantha's question. Is your group looking at connecting these vulnerable communities with communities in the IRA? What is IRA? Oh, I have no idea. Okay. It would be good to. So reach out to me, Samantha. I have no idea about that part. I wish I did, but no. It'd be good to connect. And then we won't do question room or thing. Oh, yeah, you've seen your. So actually, most of the problem is intentional burning. Yeah. So again, we're talking about 90% of our fires in the United States are human caused. So this probably fits into that. So most of the burning in the Flint Hills region, which is the Kansas, Oklahoma, which is where all our cattle go to graze and eat. And the problem is they found out many years ago, which is the only reason why it still exists, is that you can't plow. Because about 6 inches thick layer of soil, and then you get to limestone. If you know about limestone, it's one of the hardest materials we have. You can't plow through that, you're gonna ruin your mower. So they allowed it to remain. And the only way to really do it is to burn. And they burn because it puts the nitrogen and it puts the minerals back into the soil and it greens up really quickly. So we were out there doing burn experiments, for example, and by the end of the week, it had already greened back up. And it's almost crazy to where you see these bison and you see these deer, they'll run at the fire. And it's crazy, they'll run past you to get to the fire. And you're like, what the hell are you? And it's like, they're trying to eat. They associate with food. And so they're a little bit different than us. We tend to act like jackrabbits and rabbits and run away from fires because we're afraid of it. But most animals aren't. They understand the power behind it. So it's a huge source. And the problem is trying to figure out how do we do what we need to do, because last time I checked, everybody wants a steak that eats meat. So how do we continue to do that and balance it with air quality? And that's what the problem is, because I can't tell $1 billion industry to stop or change. You know, it's multiple billions we're talking about. And you come in there saying, hey, it's bad for people. They're like, I want my money. Same as the BP oil spill. Look at that. And you'll see how you can tell people with billions of dollars what to do. Good question, though. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Samantha, for filling me in on that. We'll have to talk later about that question. Kathy, question. When it comes to balancing human health impacts with land management from prescribed burns, is anyone you know of working on a framework or ideas to balance impacts? Is there conversations about shutting down highways or asking people to leave area X number of hours while burning is happening? Yes, we are working with those folks. We're working with the land managers. We're working with those groups. The biggest problem is people don't care. What I mean by that is, if I tell you to miss work, go live somewhere else for a couple days, couple hours, weeks, you're gonna look at me and say, screw off. You know, you're gonna look at me and say, you say something else, but you get the point, right? And so it's how do you tell, like right now we're having trouble with Seattle and most of the state of Washington because we call them spoiled brats essentially, right? Because most people don't understand how much fire used to be on the landscape before they lived there. So we're trying to tell them that the fire amount that you're seeing right now and the smoke that you're complaining about is only 10% of what you should be seeing. And trying to convince someone that, oh, I live in this nice, expensive $3,000 apartment in Seattle and I got to see smoke all the time because somebody in DC or somebody in Kansas doesn't want to die. It's hard to convince them of that, right? And so this is why that health impacts with land management is very difficult. And this is why we're trying to strike that balance somewhere. And then you have people who just do what they want. So we have these things called burn permits too, to where you got to burn on certain conditions, you got to get federal clearance, or you got to get state, local clearance from the government. People get these permits, but if you've ever driven a car and you've seen the speed sign, do you really listen to it? Right? Like we all have our license, most of us in this room, I assume. When have you ever fully followed all the rules of the road? That's human nature, right? And so it's the same thing with air quality impacts. It's like, if I get a burn permit, and the burn permit says between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. I need to burn, I usually don't wake up till 11 a.m. most days. You think I'm gonna wake up extra on that one day that you told me I can burn because it's good for somebody who I don't even know? No, I'm gonna wake up at 11 a.m. and call my buddy and be like, hey, come over here. By the time we go, we're gonna have a beer and we're gonna burn at 1 o'clock. Now, the meteorology has changed. So now I'm screwing up a lot of people because I'm burning now. And you scale this up to millions of people. Now you have a huge issue. So that's what we're facing. Is there one more question in the room? I think I saw some hands over there. So when it comes to fires and being politicized, the short answer is no, it actually wasn't politicized. And the reason why it wasn't politicized is the same as the problem, because no one cared about it. And so until literally the Canadian fires happened, no one was talking to me about fires. And I've since done probably like 20 interviews with news and stuff like that, because they're like, oh, fire stuff happens. Where's the scientists hiding at? And it was like, we've been doing this stuff for years. There's plenty of people doing it way before me, and plenty of people gonna do it way after me. So now everyone cares, the attention is being paid to it. And so now we're in the forefront. But the main issue was the Forest Service, which a lot of people don't know this. Back in 1904, 1905, when they were being created, their mission was to fight all fires. They were like, we're gonna stop all this stuff. And no one at the time knew the implications of what they would do and how much they would screw us 100 years plus down the line. But the reason why they did it is because there was a huge fire that happened that burned like 3 states in the West Coast, killed a lot of people, one of the most deadliest fires ever. And back then, we literally had high school students, we had Army, even the Buffalo Soldiers, if you've ever heard of them, they were out there literally knocking on doors one by one because we didn't have cell phones then, right? And they were saying, oh crap, you gotta get out your house, get your kids, run, fire's coming. And most people didn't listen or believe them, so they got burned and died. And so the Forest Service had this knee-jerk reaction. And that's when you get things like Smokey the Bear, and you get these crazy things that essentially propaganda, right? And you get movies like Bambi, where his mom dies in the fire and all this crazy stuff. And that's where that stuff comes from. So it's like fear mongering. So this screwed up people's mindset when it comes to how we symbiotically live with fire. So we have fire positive things and fire negative things, what I try to tell people. There's some trees, plants, bushes that can only operate in a fire sense. So like pine needles, for example, need to reach a certain temperature to germinate. You can't do that without fire. Right? So even the botanists, sometimes they put them in stoves and ovens to heat them up to germinate them. Most people don't know this. Some bushes, they only operate by burning and then they come back. But then you have animals such as us and rabbits, where I make the joke about that, is that we run from those things. Our food source is tied to that, nothing we need as a fire. We're like koalas, right? They just sat there in the Australian fires and just cooked on trees. It's pretty sad if you didn't look at it, but I wouldn't recommend Googling either. But yeah, you just see a koala just sitting on a tree just holding on. It's pretty bad. But anyways, so yeah, thank you for the question. But yeah, it is political, but it's not political in the right way. Yeah. Yeah. Me and Samantha need to talk offline. It looks like. Yeah, definitely. Send me an email, Samantha, please. Joseph.wilkins@Howard. Oh, yeah, we'll talk. Anyways, question.
Is there anything that you wish Congress would do to explicitly give Forest Service, EPA, DOI, USDA, whoever, power, to be more proactive, particularly in getting information?
Well, the first thing I want them to do is get out of our way. Yeah, it'd be really nice to just do our jobs, right? And to be able to have the financial means to do so. And like I mentioned with the slide is cutting off somebody's 15-year experiment, 5-year experiment because you don't like their ideas. That's not how science works. Like, prove me wrong. If I'm wrong, fine. But prove me wrong. Show me. Don't just say, I don't like this. I'm not cool with that. I'm fine with people saying they deny climate change. Cool, but I'm gonna show you you're wrong. Me and 97% of my colleagues are gonna show you you're wrong. But fine, ask the questions. Because sometimes we might get it wrong. The model might have some issues, the satellite data might have some issues. Fine, we can tweak those things and fix it. And that's how we work together. You challenge me. And that's what I want people to do. And then if the government wants to be involved, they need to just fund us, right? Fund the experts, fund the scientists, fund the non-scientists who are working with the local communities. Give all that money to people who actually care. Don't just give it to people who, for example, have a 15-year research program that you've just been funding just because so-and-so researcher's there, which we've all seen as scientists, where this big researcher has been doing this for 20 years. Of course they got a right idea. No, they might not. Actually read their proposal and see if it's real, right? So this is how we need to fix it, and this is how we change the nature going forward. And this leads to what my new favorite term is, transdisciplinary science. So where we got to stop telling people this is what's best for you and pull them into the table. So if we can all discuss together, you might know something I don't know. Same as me and Joe meeting. He has a different expertise than I do, but we can pull ourselves together and say, we might not have ever met before, we might not know each other, but we can work together. We can save this planet. So that's what we need to do. And the government can spearhead that, which I don't think they will, but they should. It'd be good. Yeah, so thank you for the question. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so when it came to adaptive capacity and looking at the Community Health Vulnerability Index, there were several variables that we did look at. That was just the main one because that was the newest one that we enhanced it with. Because previously we weren't looking at how people can manage and adapt themselves to an issue. We were just looking at your economic status, where do you live, how close are you to a source? So if you're within 15 feet of the forest or 15 miles of the forest, how often will burn in your area, stuff like that. And we looked at your like what type of work you do. So if you're an outdoor worker versus your indoor worker, if you're a person, so for those who don't know, if you do strenuous activity, you take in more air. Taking in more bad air is bad. If you're outside longer, you're gonna breathe in more bad air. So these are the things we put into the system. Yeah, so good question. Anybody else? Yeah, go ahead. I hope not, but yeah. So one thing I did was I quit the government. You can't stop me from working if like when the shutdown was coming, I didn't have to worry about it. My friends did, my colleagues did, but I didn't. So I was a part of the group in 2019 that had the 35, the longest in history. And it's really hard to do your work when the government's not funded, right? And so one of the things we can do is have non-governmental workers working with governmental workers so we can keep that research going. And in terms of preparing for it, we did when you know who came in office, because I came in during the Obama administration, I'll tell y'all this. I was in the EPA, was all happy, his picture was on the wall and everything. And then you forget that when the administration changes, you still got to put the picture on the wall and pretend like you're happy every day, right? And so yeah, we were kind of caught off guard. It was like, that was like my second year as a postdoc. So everybody was walking there with their head down, all sad. And it was actually very grim. Because I mean, you tell them about people who did 20 years of research and they were stopping that day, like literally. And so it was very sad, right? And some people literally got fired. We cut our workforce by 38%. Yeah, and I think ORD was 51%. So literally the office I was in, half the folks were just gone, just because the administration changed. So you can't really prepare for that, right? And we didn't know who was getting the axe. We thought it was going to be a last person in, first one out type thing. Wasn't that. They just went for individual offices they thought shouldn't be operating anymore. And then they just kind of, reduction of workforce is what they try to call it. And they try to say, we're cutting the fat, we're getting all the pieces that we don't need. You just cut 30 research programs. What do you mean we didn't need that? So yeah, so it's hard to prepare for that. But the best thing to do is just make sure there's multiple fail-safes, which is people like me who work with the government but at universities. And then I can continue to work while they're fired, essentially, right? So, any more? I don't know how much time we got left. Everybody good? Pizza time? Let's do it. Thank you. And thank you folks online too for joining in. Oh, let me write your email down. I'm about to send an email to Samantha.